Hey there, Vini here, and this is my second video about the game the Vulgari Eloquentia Deluxe Edition. I made a video showing the setup and teaching how to play and solving the main rules questions. If you didn't watch that yet, check it out, even if you know how to play, and show it to your friends so they can do the homework before game night. If you already watched that, thank you very much, and now let me show my face to the camera a little. We are in Italy in late Middle Ages, and there are many dialects spoken around the country that form a popular, or in other words, vulgar language. As merchants, we realized the importance of studying those languages that the public at large spoke. And obviously, the church got really interested. It's possible to prosper in a career as a merchant, or you can even join the clergy and become the next pope. That's the universe of the Vulgari Eloquentia. I'll talk about the specs briefly, then I'll give my opinion about the game, and in the end, I will talk about the components and the differences that this deluxe edition brings. This is a new version from the original game from 2010, from Italian designer Mario Papini and publisher Giochix. This edition was launched via Kickstarter and Giochix.it, which is a platform by the publisher itself. It was released in 2019, backers already started receiving the game last year. I got my copy here in Brazil this March. It's a 2 to 5 player game that lasts up to 2 hours. And its main mechanic is action points, with a slight set collection. It's a medium to heavy euro. Medium rare, I'd say. And in BGG's weight scale, which goes from 1 to 5, I classify it as a 4. That already brings me to my first point in my review. And I'd like to tell you what kind of player I am, from what perspective my opinion is coming from. That complexity for me is perfect. I have a limitation, which might be an intellectual one, that stops me from comprehending certain games. Terra Mystica is an example. I wanted to play, but I couldn't understand a thing. Another example is Through the Ages. It has an excellent app with a very well-made tutorial, but it's just too much for my brain. I can't handle it. I prefer more complex games. The top 4 in my humble collection only has heavier games, but they have to be within this limit, and the Vulgari is right there. I was about to take a break in buying games temporarily, but one day I was browsing a Brazilian website about board games and I saw a banner, help in the creation of a new language. I'm an English teacher, I'm really interested in languages, so I obviously clicked the banner because the theme really attracted me. Not to mention that it's a unique theme, but playing the game, you have a small disappointment. That thematic aspect is not felt during the match. Even making a lot of sense mechanically, different regions of the map have different languages, you need to have a better understanding level to deal with more complex manuscripts, scribes help you improve your knowledge, that language thing isn't really central. However, many other thematic aspects are strongly present. Think about movement. The fact that it's difficult to move around the map makes thematic sense because traveling at that time was no easy task. And man, when you think about the Middle Ages, especially in Italy, there's no way the church is not present. So it makes total sense that that's such an important aspect of the game, including when you, as your character, think, these guys are gaining a lot of power, I want to be part of that. It's a game about the church if you want to think about that. But that's perfectly fine. What a different theme. And it's exciting. How can you not be amazed at the possibility of becoming the next pope? But it's understandable that they sell the game talking about the language. That sounds more attractive. And even the time setting is something that you don't see very often. My impression is that usually games take place a little before or after this specific time period. So, in my opinion, Vulgari is already a good addition to a lot of people's collections. Only considering the thematic side, even if the big selling point ends up having a small role. The fact that the mechanic isn't super standard is also welcome. I love worker placement. I would have a whole collection of it. But it's nice that we have something else here. And what makes worker placement so good for me is that thing of occupying a space and therefore blocking others. I love when a game has that option. Should I do something that is very good to me or something that would be bad for someone else? And in this game, you don't fight over actions, but you fight a lot over the cubes, over the tracks, who has more money, the manuscripts, and in a smaller degree, but also the events. Speaking of cubes, this extremely limited stock is genius. The competition it creates is amazing. And they're thematic. These cubes represent favors from different classes in society. And can you imagine how many friends you need to be Pope? Merchants in particular need to know that the clergy players need these cubes desperately. And they have the possibility to grab those cubes, affecting the clergy players. The cubes remind me a little bit of the fuel market in Power Grid. As a matter of fact, I love in Power Grid to stock fuel instead of burning it to make it more expensive to the rest of the players. And I can do something similar here. I have ranked my modest 56 game collection. And two keywords for me to decide if game A was better than game B were dynamism and frustration. What I'm calling dynamism is how boring or not a game feels if I'm doing a lot of things. A feeling that I have in great part by literally moving around a lot of stuff. And I already find worker placement dynamic, but here you're moving around a map, so it's a cooler simulation. And frustration would be how stuck or incapable I would feel in a game versus how much I feel that the power is in my hands. And this is directly related to luck. Here, you virtually only have open information. You know exactly how many spaces you need to reach that bastard that advanced on the track that you wanted. You can see how much money everybody has. You know right from the setup that in round 6, this city will be active and such event will go to such city and those will be the cubes available to everyone. In no moment did I feel frustrated, but even if you think moving is slow, it's not only slow, but it also can be considered expensive, you have no excuse to not get what you want. If it's something related to a region on the board, you should have planned to arrive there earlier. If it's cubes, you should have ensured to be first player. Basically, you never find the game unfair. Regarding balance, every path is valid. If you want to join the clergy, you have a smaller range of actions. But the advantages are that you don't need to move around that much, and there's a bunch of points waiting for you at the end. If you're a merchant, you'll make much more money, but A, you need to pay charity to those clergy members, and B, you need to chase after, quite literally, multiple things, a variety of actions. And there's a way in the game to get an extra action point, but the only way to do that is becoming a cardinal. Some people on BGG were discussing the validity of remaining merchant. The first game I played was against myself, and I followed the two opposite paths. One player remained merchant and became banker, and the other one became pope. The banker beat the pope. And that's possible if you read your opponent's game. And you might be thinking, well, of course, you knew what your own intentions were, but you can obviously see when an opponent is going for pope. That means there's interaction. And even with strategy being very necessary, a more tactical approach has its place too, because you have to adapt according to the circumstances. And I feel like that's doable. At the same time that a lot of planning is involved, the game is not short of excitement. There's some hidden information for that common surprise element that a lot of games have of not knowing how many points somebody will get. The manuscripts are random, and I like that. But even if you don't, it's one element among many others. The most exciting part is probably the end of the game, represented by the death of the Pope. When a tile is about to be flipped, you're like, oh boy, the Pope's gonna die. I won't have time to do what I wanted. And I think it's never good to think, I had time to do everything that I wanted. Everything went right. It's nice to feel that you could have been more efficient. And that brings me to my last and most important point. This game gives you that good agony. That desire to do everything, to do 20 actions on your turn. At any given moment, most actions seem good. Mr. Tom Vaso from the Dice Tower talks frequently about that good feeling of having an array of interesting options. And for me, that's the Vulgari Eloquentia's main aspect. Right when you are being taught the game, you find out you have a decision to make, to follow the path of the church or not. And that's really exciting. It sounds simple, putting 5 discs on the board, but it gets tense. It's a complicated decision. Still, I don't think the game takes too long. But I haven't played with 5 yet. Downtime might be a negative point of this game, because the actions are not alternated. During your go, you do all your 5 actions, and then your opponent does all of theirs. Speaking of player count, 2 is pretty good. My current favorite game is one that I'd rather not play with 2. But currently, I wouldn't refuse a match of the Vulgari with only that player count. You can already feel everything, all that competition for resources and points. So, I wouldn't discard the possibility of having this game in your collection if you play mostly with 2. But I can't wait to see a full table, because I'm sure things will be even more interesting with a tougher competition. Shall we talk about components? Metal coins, enough said. How not to like this, right? This is board gamers' delight. I have to say that personally, it doesn't really add to my immersion, but it looks really nice, can't argue with that. Good job by the publisher. The art is wonderful. I love the box, I love the drawings that represent the actions, I love the art in the friar and cardinal tiles, I love the space to place action discs. In the original game, some of the art was a little meh, but here there's only beautiful art. This new art makes reference to the medieval style, but in an attractive and colorful way. The meeples are a great touch. In the original game, you only had a pawn that didn't change. The cubes are very good looking, and it's such a simple detail, avoiding basic colors. Not to mention that this choice took into consideration the color blind, so that's another positive point. The shield is perfect. It's stable, and it shows every single way to score points. I have some problems with the board, though. First, a compliment. The layout, the positioning of things, is 1,000 times better. The best example is that in the original, the order of the actions that provide cubes had no logic, so you had abysses first and then politicians, but the rules related to cubes didn't change. Abysses are worth 1 and politicians are worth 3. And politicians are discarded first, then noblemen, then abysses. It made no sense. But the board is too dark. It's too gray. Check out the Tabletopia version. See how bright the board is there. I find it awesome that the names of the cities and the actions are in Italian. I like the similar thing that happens in Ticket to Ride Europe. But the font is way too small. Look at the font in this initial city. So much blank space. And the board lacks some reminders. Most reminders are good. They were present in the original as well. But more information was needed. Like how many ducati you get for discarding nobles, how many actions it costs to move by sea. The existing reminder in the movement action is useless. And how many knowledge points a scribe is worth. That sort of info is in the player aid, but it would be much more practical on the board. I already pointed this out in my tutorial video, but the reminder to enter Bologna is confusing. It should be in the last space. I also find the tracks kind of small, the discs are kind of small. The action discs, on the other hand, are great. It feels good to manipulate these discs. About manuscripts. There's a whole board dedicated to them. Why isn't there a single reminder, especially regarding the number of manuscripts per round? And the thing about manuscript cost versus manuscript level is confusing, because they use the same font, and there are no icons here, making it clear that these numbers represent actions. To make matters worse, there are pictures of the manuscripts here. Level 1 manuscripts won't be in this position forever, only in the beginning of the game. This board is more confusing than helpful. The player aid is good, I just don't see the need for every player to have one. And I would even say there's too much info here, but a sin for many games is not having player aids, so I won't complain. Negative points of the player aid. There's no reminder of when the charity action stops, although that's easy to remember. And there is no setup reminder anywhere, including the back of the rulebook. Numbers are very important, because they're always hard to remember. Initial money, cubes per round, manuscripts per round. In that case, you have plenty of reasons to use the PDF that I uploaded to BGG. The rulebook, it continues a little confusing. I read some reviews saying that the confusing rulebook of the 2010 edition made people not play. There are whole sentences copied and pasted, and some of them are problematic. Some things are harder to understand than they should, and others are simply ambiguous. The biggest example is that both in Italian and English, in both the old version and the new one, it clearly says, as soon as manuscripts blah blah, but the correct way to play, confirmed by both the publisher and the designer, is to do that in the beginning of a new round. But they changed the order of some of the explanations, and that already made a huge difference. And the main positive change, rules were simplified. All the differences, at least that I noticed, are the following. 1. Some manuscripts are now removed during setup, which makes fighting over them more interesting, and it increases the need to level up in knowledge. 2. For movement, previously, there was this thing of staying in sea and in the next round returning to land. That's gone. 3. The Papal Library, Messenger, and Orient track are way simpler than before and much more valuable now. And 4. The number of victory points that certain things are worth were tweaked. And I trust that that made the game more balanced. The 2010 rulebook, as well as this new one, have a big problem, which is the use of the word turn even to refer to what the rest of the planet calls a round. And that creates an extra problem of interpretation. I'd like to comment on the expansions. I didn't buy them. I got worried that they could overcomplicate the game, considering that there's a lot going on already in the base game. And I often have new people playing with me, so I don't know how much I would use the expansions. If you watched my rules video, you know that I even remove an action entirely. So in the second time that I'm playing with certain players, basically there will be a new module for them. Please don't consider this an opinion about the expansions. I'm only justifying why I can't give a proper opinion. Let's go to my final thoughts. I'm in love with this game at the moment. It's a game that really needed an edition like this. It deserved to go back to the market, simply to be known by new players. And thankfully, this new version brought some structural improvements, and not only aesthetic ones. But more could have been done. An even better board, and an even better rulebook. My conclusion is that the Vulgari Eloquentia ends up disappointing a little in regard to the language theme, which is its big promise. But you will be pleased by having been hooked by it, because this is a surprising and captivating experience for various other reasons. Any kind of discussion and comment both on YouTube and BGG is very welcome. Tell me if you liked what you just watched and if you'd like to see more. Thank you very, very much, and see you next time.